And now the fifth movement also. Yeah, so I collected the opinions of two different string quartets that play this piece and of some listener from the two concerts. I cannot show like a real consistent data because it's just a starting research. But anyway, for discussing how irony works, I think it is enough for this piece. So for instance, here some listeners' opinion. So they think that it would be very difficult to perceive any irony if I didn't tell them the program note. Someone have recognized the theme of Radetzky March, and maybe some of you as well. Here, both performer and listener think that irony can be an added value, and in bold this last sentence because I think is an important thought. Maybe the role that irony can have, maybe for further research. I don't know. It's interesting, I think. And also these very long considerations from performers. But basically they're saying that it's important to know if there are ironic aspects in the music, because this can have the performance in the playing and in the interpretation, of course. So in general, the ironic presence was not clear in these pieces. To me, this is not a problem because I use irony as inspiration, as a tool for developing musical material. So it's not really my point to have people recognize all the ironic elaborations that I make. But of course, the program note is important. So now I want to explain a bit my piece. This is very short, maybe. Yeah, actually, this is a very dramatic moment because this New Year's concert in Vienna is transmitted, of course, all over the world and in Italy too, but the piece has been composed to commemorate the Field Marshal Joseph Radetzky's suppression of Milan in 1848, so the so-called 5 days of Milan. And so the tradition of the rhythmic clapping by the audience and by Italians as well, it appears very inappropriate. So I wanted then to think about the contrast between the joyful music and the image of the war, and especially as an Italian. And so I tried to recontextualize the melody of Radetzky March in a war scenario. So the last movement was as this lamento harmonic contest. So maybe now with context, maybe now also for you it's more simple to understand what I played before. So I want to start with this big question that, of course, I'm not going to answer in all of these aspects. But there are books from which I started that are very helpful. And I use these books mainly for two purposes. One is that they give me a model to develop a method of analysis. So how to discover ironic attitude in music, or how irony can be the core of an artwork. I think these books really give a lot of suggestions, and especially the first one by Esti Sheinberg gives us some criteria that I will explain after. And also I really like the Stephen Zank about Maurice Ravel, because Ravel is not like the first composer that one thinks when talking about irony, but actually there are a lot of things. And he proposed also the concept of gentle irony taken from music critique from the period of Ravel. So it's a concept that was already in the mind of musicians at that time. And also the last one is a paper by Roland Woodley, and is more about performance. And I think it's very interesting because he compares different performances and how these performers can underline different ironic aspects, changing the phrasing or the rhythmic, some rhythmic fluctuations. And so it's interesting for how to perform in an ironic way, let's say. So I started as a classical research from the dictionary. And I think this definition is actually very good. I don't think there is something wrong with this. And also the dictionary gives how we can experience irony. So there is the so-called dramatic irony and so the Socratic irony. So it's a really good definition, I think. But anyway, there are some other fundamental features worth of attention that we cannot find here in the dictionary. And for this, I used the books from by Mueke, Irony and Ironic. And even if his study deals with literature, I think it helps to delineate some characteristics of how irony works in art in general, probably. These two diagrams are really helpful, and I want to highlight in particular these features that we need an object or a subject in order to use irony. So we need to apply irony to something or someone. There must be a user and an audience, of course, someone that receives irony. Irony can also be enriched by signals that can be gestures or symbols that are undoubtedly exaggerated or in contradictions. And moreover, we can see that irony works in a sociocultural context, and this is really important, and sometimes probably we forgot about this. This means that an author needs to know the context in which he is applying the irony, and all in this sense, the just mentioned signals can have an ironic meaning. At the same time, the audience is made by individuals, of course, and the single person that is receiving an ironic message can read and understand differently from others, depending on its own culture and social role, of course. But so if we want to understand or discuss how irony works, we need to take into consideration at least the context, roles, messages, literal or hidden messages, and the interpretation process. So yes, I want to report these 6 criteria that Sheinberg proposed. I think are useful for a better understanding of at least the irony in the modern era, I think. And in the light of these criteria, it should be possible now to recognize more easily which ironical manifestation we are in presence even during the listening of the piece. And we can use this criteria as a map. So now we can return to my composition, because now we have the context, that is this 5 days of Milan and the clapping by the audience. I work with the citation of the famous theme. And so there is an ironical elaboration because I try to change the mood of the original melody. And then the third movement, it is more subtle maybe, because it was actually in my intention a military march parody. And of course, I don't think there is something that we can recognize as a military march, if not maybe the rhythm very aggressive. And also I thought that as a third movement in a classical era, the third movement should be a scherzo. So it was also this ironic intention that the scherzo is a military march in my string quartet. So yes, in conclusion, I think that it is not possible to define irony unless we refer to a single author or an aesthetic. We can use some criteria like the one proposed by Schoenberg to recognize ironical manifestations. If we want to investigate irony in a work, we need to know something about the history of the composer or the composition. An interpreter can decide how to express an ironic idea or gesture, like Woodley made in his paper. And from a composer perspective, it is important to know how much do we want to make ironical meaning clear, or if we want to keep the ironical meaning in the shadow. In general, I think irony can have a big role in a composition and in an interpretation of a work. Irony is a rhetorical tool, and as such, if we approach music as a language, then we should know how this rhetorical tool works. Yeah, and take irony seriously, because I think sometimes people just talk about irony, not knowing what exactly is irony, and I'm trying to understand what it is also. So this is a short bibliography. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. That was really very well in time. And so it's my role here now to start a discussion. If there are any questions from the audience. Yes, please.
First of all, congratulations for the presentation and also for your composition. I would like to ask you, when did appear the idea of irony in your composition process? If this idea was from the beginning of the process, artistic process, or it appeared while you were composing?
Yeah, I think this is the first composition that I understood I was using irony consciously. But yes, I recognize some ironical aspects also in some composition while I was a student, while I was trying different things. But my first interest was in the rhetorical tools in music, or in the music as a language, or this was my first interest, and then I saw that irony was really really important in my composition because it came naturally. So yes.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. It's very fascinating topics. Irony in the very much sense that, of course, for me, when speaking about marches, the classical example is Prokofiev's Love for Three Oranges. This march, it is the wrong basis, so that it's ironic march, of course. But I mean, it is very old notion of aesthetics is speaking of romantic irony. It was a very important category in the romantic music, appearing in E.V. Hoffman's Cat Moore, Pussycat Moore, or typical example. But also in music like Beethoven, Fifth Symphony, the Fugato part for the double bass is comical, because he writes double basses are always related as well. So he writes music which is very fast and difficult. So it's ironic, and you smile when you hear that, and they are fighting with the material. And many others. So, but romantic irony meant that, like Friedrich Schlegel said, that the poet is living in his very high transcendental worlds, and when he comes back on the earth, he thinks everything is ridiculous because it is nothing compared to this high elevated spheres in which he had to be, and that causes the romantic irony.
Yeah, yeah, this is something also I'm thinking about, because what's the role, what's the purpose of using irony now? Because as a composer, I have to deal with the society now. So I'm trying to understand what is irony for people now also. Not only for musicians. So I talk also with very young people, and I don't understand sometimes their way of joking. It's really difficult sometimes. But I like to have a role, I mean, a social role, like to raise questions, like this one, for instance. It can be a social problem. Maybe not this one, because I mean, the New Year's concert is already established, so we have distance from the war. But there are now these problems of what we are using in which context, what's the origin of the music, sometimes who composed it, in which context. Sometimes it creates problems. So
yes,
I like to use irony to raise questions or problems.
Yes, and you're right, it depends very much on the audience. I remember I once studied this Gabriel Fauré après melody, very sad melody, and I had some 25 different interpretations. And the last one was Barbra Streisand. I took it just for me, it was ironic because it was with Hollywood strings and everything. And then I played this, I was lecturing in Aix-en-Provence, I think, for the French students. They took it seriously. They were quite deeply moved by this Barbra Streisand. This I thought it's totally ironic. So you see that it's varying.
Yeah, and every time I talk about my research that is dealing with irony, everyone gives me new examples of irony. So it's incredible, the difference of how we perceive irony is really interesting, of course, yes.
Yes, thank you for this comments.
Thank you, and as an Italian, me too. It's a shame figure of Radetzky being celebrated by this music, but I think that the New Year concert itself could be a great subject for irony, because not just this march at the end of the concert, but the concert itself, it's a strange mess of a lot of strange thing for our and even for this kind of popular music that was at the beginning of the concert itself, of popular music just converted in the symbol of classical art, Western art music, but all this idea that the music that actually is played there.
That's true.
It's quite interesting because it's curious triangle in this case. There's a war, the person, controls the father, and the circumstances which are not there. And then today this piece connected with the concert that is quite out of the intentions of the Strauss family and all that, and nowadays perhaps audience today, even in Italy, is this music is more the music of the New Year's concert than that the music celebrating, I don't know, in the 19th century.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but of course the coexisting of different material also is ironic by nature, probably. But also this is another difficult of mine, because someone told me that, so my compositions are not this one, but other are maybe postmodern compositions, because I put different material, I made some kind of pastiche. But I'm not sure, I mean, not every contrast is ironic. I mean, this is why I want to understand the meaning of using irony, because I think we need also something after the ironic moment. If there is something after the ironic moment, some thoughts, some other considerations, that maybe the ironic elaborations as like a good closure, I don't know. Otherwise, it's only maybe comical or only joyful or playing with material, I don't know. I'm reflecting, of course, that's not.
We have time for one more question or two.
I'll try and find the quick one. Sorry, I find myself with a huge list. So your irony is dependent on something pre-existing. Is that right?
Usually, yes.
well, how could it be without being something pre-existing?
Yeah.
And one of my many questions is, doesn't that give you as a composer quite a limitation rather than stimulation?
Well, of course, I need a context in order to start the ironic engine. I don't know, to trigger ironic thoughts. I need a context. This is why I use pre-existing material. I don't feel like it's a limitation because I can use it very freely, everything. And also I can hidden message. So maybe, I mean, in this case, you can hear the Radetzky march in the last movement, but all the 8 minutes before the last movement, there is not citation of Radetzky march. So it's
one sort of ironic, really ironic remark would be, can you write ironic music in relation to an atonal piece?
yeah, it depends on the context again, I think, yes.
Sorry, I'm going on a little bit, but that raised my question about your compositional language. What would you say that is?
Yes, I don't know how to define my language because every piece is really different. Yeah, sometimes I wrote also.
Sorry.
No, sometimes I write also tonal, maybe sometimes.
Well,
so
I don't know how you categorize the piece you play.
Yes, tonal, maybe, yes. Simply.
Except that I found it tonal.
Okay.
That's ironic.
Scoring.
Yes, so yes, we have one more question, please.
Thank you so much for this wonderful paper, first of all. What I understood from the dictionary definition that you provided is that basically the irony functions that there is something with an identity and then it starts departing from it. So that this initial identity thing is the pre-existing condition. That means actually when you compose maybe the reflection of the irony, to do this, you don't need a pre-existing well-known something, but you build up your own something like gestural or textual units with some clear identity and then start departing from it. I think it might give the impression of irony. That's what I thought as a composer.
Yeah,
it shouldn't be necessarily some other piece. Or
of course. Yeah, thank you.
That's very nice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, so maybe just one short question from me as well. Well, I started to think about the age-old sign object interpretant triangle invented by Charles Sundance Peirce, and also about the issue of understanding irony. You mentioned it briefly, but could you perhaps elaborate? What do you think? What happens, for example, when the irony is not understood? So if you have the intention of being ironic and your listeners do not receive that.
Yeah, of course.
How do you feel as a composer in such case? Is it a failure of communication?
Yeah, no, for me not, because my purpose is anyway to write a piece that people can enjoy in different ways. So I hope that you can enjoy any way that is, even if you don't know Radetzky march or all the history yet. So for me, it's not a failure, but of course, it's better if everyone understands all my layers, all my work, all my thoughts, of course.
Yes, of course, but it's not always possible.
Yeah, it's difficult.
That's it. Okay, so I believe that we have finished the discussion already. So thank you very much, Fabrizio, for your presentation. And I will now ask Anna to join us.
I'm here.
Hello? Yes, we can hear you, but we can't see you so far. Maybe
Probably it's because the previous
yes,
presentation is not over. So
great.
You have to turn on the screen share option.
Yes, so you can share your presentation now with us.
Oh no, I cannot, because you didn't end the previous screen share. You have to end it first.
Ah, okay. So that was probably stop share.
Okay. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes, everything is fine. Okay, so I will change my place here. Yes. Anna is going to hear me better when I'm here. So I would like now to introduce my colleague from the Academy of Music in Łódź, Anna Wójcikowska, music theorist, lecturer at the Grażyna and K. Studbacewicz Academy of Music, and member of the Arthur Rubinstein Philharmonic Choir. She is currently working on a PhD thesis about the topic that we have here, namely the activity of the Warsaw Music Workshop and the idea of open performance. This is Warsaw Music Workshop is actually a musical formation created by Zygmunt Krause, a famous composer from Łódź. And Anna will tell us more about this fascinating group and their idea of composing. So welcome, Anna, and please start your presentation.
Thank you very much. I'm very sad I cannot be there with you in person, and I'm a little bit jealous of my colleagues that we were able to be there, to travel to Barcelona, but also very grateful for the opportunity to connect online. So moving on to my paper. The following paper is a result of my interest in the activity of the Polish avant-garde group Warsztat Muzyczny, the Warsaw Music Workshop, and presents some of the thoughts and conclusions from my PhD, as you, Kasia, mentioned. When studying the Warsaw Music Workshop's archival materials that I have received from its founder, Professor Zygmunt Krause, or gathered myself, so concert programs, scores, recordings, press materials, letters, I realized how wide-ranging the activity of the group was. And I thought not only did the group's legacy deserve proper recognition, it also deserved its own term and definition. That's why I proposed the term open performance, which I will attempt to explicate. The act of musical performance, Aufführung, regardless of the style, epoch, or form of notation, transfers a certain degree of responsibility for the sound of the work to the shoulders of the performer. In the case of 20th century aleatoric and experimental music, the responsibility tilts towards the performer more than it is in the case of strictly written or fully determined works. However, if there is responsibility, there is also artistic freedom as an interpreter's right to creative expression. Performing new current music requires musicians to adopt an active artistic attitude. If musicians strive to broaden their horizons and undertake other activities than just performance, they enter an area that can be described or called as open performance. This term is based on an association with the notion of an open form, usually understood as such a form whose general course is composed while the performer is responsible for its structural shape, for example, the sequence of the links, so work with a variable external form. However, this concept is sometimes defined more broadly, for example, as a musical form whose shape is an element of artistic creation transferred to the performer, or a genre whose goal is getting to know the music itself, its secrets, as poetically described by Bogusław Schaffer. The concept of open performance corresponds to the idea of an open work presented by Umberto Eco in his famous book, The Open Work, Form and Indeterminacy in Contemporary Poetics. Based on research on many contemporary artworks, using various analytical methods, Eco made an attempt to describe the theoretical model of an open work. His considerations led to the conclusion that every modern work of art has a specific potential of openness, which is often beyond the creator's consciousness or intention. and whether it will achieve it depends on the interpreter, performer, or recipient. Although Eco pointed out that the entire semiotic and aesthetic potential of a work is created in the process of interpretation, in his book he focused more on the opus itself rather than on the moment of its contact with the performer or recipient. On the other hand, the idea of open performance I am discussing here is clearly visible at the junction of the above mentioned phenomena, the work and its performance. It creates a space to look at the attitude adopted by performance towards music that poses requirements that go beyond the performer's traditional emploi. In the concept of open performance, the openness can be understood generally as affirmativeness, commitment, and proactivity. This attitude is realized in the activity of the Warsaw Music Workshop, a pioneering group in its field which paved the way for other ensembles on the new music scene. The Warsaw Music Workshop was one of the first groups in Poland dedicated solely to performing and promoting new music. The genesis of the ensemble should be seen in the series of concerts under the same name, Music Workshop, which took place between 1963 and 67 under the banner of the Polish Radio Experimental Studio. It was the initiative of Józef Patkowski, which was the long-term head of the studio. Many Polish and international new music pieces were performed or premiered during the Music Workshop concerts, of which the cast was variable. The Warsaw Music Workshop as a quartet was founded at the end of 1967 on the initiative of Zygmunt Krause. The pianist and composer, who was disappointed in the quality of many performances within the Music Workshop concert series, decided to establish a professional group that was to specialize only in the latest music. 3 other musicians decided to join him and devote their careers to playing contemporary music. Trombonist Edward Borowiak, clarinetist Czesław Pałkowski, and cellist Witold Gałązka. The unusual combination of instruments made it necessary to create new repertoire. In the very beginning of its concert activity, the group performed pieces commissioned from Polish composers, supplementing the concert programs with pre-existing pieces for any set of instruments or any number of performance, instrumental theater pieces, graphic scores, etc. You can see a few examples here on the slide. There was one single piece written especially for this particular instrumentation entitled Manzit by Karl Erik Welin. Then they moved on to pretty much exclusively playing pieces dedicated to the quartet. We can see a few examples here, very wide-ranging aesthetics and genres and types of compositions, both from modernist or postmodern aesthetics. The result of the group's activity is over 100 works written especially for the Warsaw Music Workshop by composers from around the world, which they had been performing in 18 countries for 20 years of stage activity until 1988. So back to open performance. The characteristics of open performance include elements determined by repertoire. The main aspect is versatility, manifested in 3 following areas: technical, aesthetical, and performative. The scope of technical requirements include, first of all, the mastery of extended techniques, many examples of which can be found in the repertoire of the workshop. In addition, a challenge of a technical but also a performative nature is to go beyond your own specialization, for example, playing other instruments, other conventional instruments, folk instruments, electronic instruments, various sound objects, as well as singing. The technical aspect is related to the aesthetical one. The stylistic range of the pieces performed by the Warsaw Music Workshop is very large. These pieces require musicians to use not only the extended playing techniques, but also traditional articulation, so-called beautiful sound, pleasant, lovely sound, because some compositions imitate the style of early music or dances, or contain quotes from the classical and romantic repertoire. The performative field consists primarily of compositions from the genre of instrumental theater, quasi-theatrical pieces, or even some conventional works that contain a humorous element and therefore require acting to some extent. The Warsaw Music Workshop's open performance is broadly based on making artistic decisions, and as such can be seen as a curatorial role. In addition to the obvious issues related to the functioning of the group, for example, choosing which pieces will be included in the repertoire, there are also examples of interfering with the musical material, not only in the case of open forms, but also in the case of works which we would call closed or finished forms. Here again, we talk about the issue of co-authorship and responsibility for the work. In the case of the workshop, it is particularly important, not only because a large part of the group's repertoire is indeterministic music, where it is the performance artistic vision that often creates the very identity of the work, like it is, for example, in graphic scores. But also because sometimes musicians actually modified the pieces that had been composed for them, guided by their own aesthetic and artistic sense. So either they made some abbreviations or even changed the actual material, the actual notes written in the score. Open performance should be considered in the composer-performer-audience triad. This type of attitude undoubtedly broadens the field of influence of the above-mentioned entities. Sometimes musicians interacted directly with composers who supervised the process of preparing a piece for public presentation. But this influence has primarily a culture-forming effect, resulting in the emergence of new repertoire on a previously unused combination of instruments. Towards the audience, the musicians of the Warsaw Music Workshop assumed a semi-dialectical, semi-confrontational attitude. Their actions were often calculated for a specific reaction of the audience, freeing them from the convention of passive reception. The popularizing activity is also invaluable. Unlike many avant-garde or improvisational groups, the Warsaw Quartet presented latest compositions to an extremely diverse audience, from participants of contemporary music festivals through Philharmonic music lovers, students of music academies, elementary school students even, and nightclub visitors. Open performance, embodied by the activity of the Warsaw Music Workshop, is therefore an artistic attitude at the interface between performance and creativity, combined with a popularizing and culture-creating role, redefining the concept of music interpretation. Its influence goes far beyond the score. After the ensemble has officially ended their activity in the late 80s, it seemed that pieces written for the workshop would be doomed to oblivion. However, an unusual phenomenon occurred in later years when workshops replicas, Nonstrom from Poland and American Narwhalaby, had been founded to revive forgotten pieces. There is also one ensemble quartet avance called Quartet Avance, but I'm not really counting them as a homage group or a replica group, because according to the members of the group, the same instrumentation as the workshop was a coincidence in this case. I am going to compare the original Warsaw Music Workshop recordings with one by Narwhalaby. Narwhalaby's trombonist Mati Barbier reveals that they first encountered the Warsaw Music Workshop around 2004 during their undergraduate studies at the California Institute of Arts. It was then that they heard from their teacher about Musique 4 by Henryk Mikołaj Górecki, also known as a trombone concerto. The musicians called themselves the Grandchild Quartet of Krause's group. Aside from performing the workshops and Nonstrom's repertoire, Narwhalaby continues the tradition of commissioning new pieces for this particular instrumentation. And as you can see, there are several pieces that had been recorded both by the Warsaw Music Workshop and Narwhalaby. And today in this paper, I'm going to compare recordings of Zygmunt Krause's Polychromy. Krause is the author of the concept of unistic music, inspired by the theory of unism by a Polish painter, Władysław Strzemiński. Polychromy is one of Krause's first unistic works. As a pure example of unistic music, it is, in fact, music without tension and with no contrasts. Each instrumental part consists of 6 staves contained in a single sheet of paper with instructions. One staff lasts 20 seconds. The person controlling the time is the pianist holding a stopwatch. This is also a polyverse piece. The composer proposed 4 different formal combinations to choose from. So here on the slide, we can see the sheet for the pianoforte part. So 6 staves, and the general rule is that the whole material is to be played twice from the beginning to the end in different formal combinations. For example, the first formal version is playing 6 staves, then 20 seconds rest, then from the beginning again, those same 6 staves, and then another rest. Or, for example, 4th version is to play 2 staves, then 2 seconds rest, 2 staves, 2 seconds rest, and so on until the whole musical material is played twice. So I think that's pretty clear. Each of analyzed recordings shown here in chronological order, presents a different formal version. We can see it here on the envelope graphs. Clearly, it's visible that the first recording, A, has 2 segments. The second recording has 3 segments, and the C recording, number 3, has 6 segments, as it is the 4th formal version. And the thin lines are, of course, rest between those segments. I am going to play short excerpts of each recording right now, so that we can have an idea of the sound of this piece, but also to enable us to compare the sonic aura of the 3 interpretations one by one. Starting with the first one, this is a live recording by Warsaw Music Workshop from the Warsaw Autumn Festival, and this is the Polish premiere of the piece, and also merely the 4th public presentation of this particular piece. Now the second recording, this is also Warsaw Music Workshop, but this is a studio recording from 1970. And now the third recording, this is a modern rendition by Narwalaby, studio recording from 2014. We can point out certain features of each interpretation. I'm going to start with the second recording, B. The sound of this interpretation, in my opinion, best reflects the ideological assumptions of unistic music. It stretches slowly, the sound is blended, the timbral differences between the instruments are leveled. Recording A is a live performance. Here the instrumental colors are a bit more varied, however still coherent. The music flows quite smoothly without any tensions. In the recording C, the sound is more clear, not as muted. However, this might be the case of audio production. Short motifs consisting of 2 or 3 notes are played more rapidly and with an accent on the first note. And this is in fact requested by the composer, who wrote this kind of performance note into the score. What's interesting is that we don't really notice that in the original Warsaw Music Workshop performances, despite the composer's tutelage over the preparation of the piece. In terms of time structure, recording B again is absolutely the most precise. It is played with an accuracy of ½ second. Narwalaby's recording C is also very close to the timing written in the score, in contrary to the recording A. Despite the use of a stopwatch by the pianist composer himself, the workshop's live performance is quite off in terms of total time, and that is mainly because the rests had been radically shortened, as if the musicians couldn't hold the tension caused by the audience presented on the live performance. Analysis of the notation in the vertical plane shows that only the first and fourth staves begin with a synchronous tutti. This piece doesn't contain a score, but so for our purpose, so that we can see the vertical structure, I just arranged the parts in a score format. So beginnings of other systems are not synchronous. This means that some musicians with the beginning of a new system still realize the ligature of the previous lasting note. In the recording A, the second segment starts with the fifth system, the one we can see right now. According to the notation, this system should start with solo clarinet, then joins the trombone, then the piano, and finally the cello. Instead, the Warsaw Music Workshop musicians start the episode together, tutti, with the first notes written in the system. This is justified in shaping a unistic form based on the similarity or even apparent uniformity of individual links, because the sound of a solo instrument would be perceived by the listener as a textual change compared to the tutti that has been going on from the beginning. This is the case in Narwalaby's recording C, where the musicians realize the score in a literal manner, which results in a few solo moments. The issue of reading the composer's intentions in this case, in the case of this piece and its implementation by the Warsaw Music Workshop, has a special context, as Krause plays three parallel roles here. He is the creator of the work, he is the pianist who entrusts himself to control the musical form, and he is the leader who conducts the group on a daily basis. The composer's intention is therefore not a matter to be read between the lines from the score. It is given to the original performers directly, firsthand. However, the situation is different in the case of Narwalaby, whose members only had the score without any additional signposts regarding the interpretation of the work. When asked whether the workshop recordings were an inspiration, Barbier responded that they were rather hard to find, these recordings, and the group acquired some of them after already playing together for a few years. So, quote, "I don't know if the recordings have been a particular inspiration or a lot of deep study on our end, as we have generally preferred to take a path focused on putting our own stamp on the repertoire. But they've been enjoyable to hear both from the historical perspective and their differing approach to ours." On to conclusions. We could consider recording B as the model one, because from the aesthetic, expressive, and sonic side, it best reflects the idea of unistic music inspired by unism in painting. It is also ideal in terms of carrying out musical time. That is because the piece here was recorded 2 years after its premiere, when it has already been performed several times. Moreover, recording the piece in a studio makes it possible to repeatedly try to achieve the desired effect. So this particular recording can be considered a conscious and mature interpretation. Krause is the type of creator who does not give up responsibility for his work, shifting it onto the performers. Rather, he presents an attitude on the other end of the spectrum. He wants to keep control of the work at every stage of the path, from concept to presentation. However, even in such peculiar circumstances, there are some minor deviations from the notation that can be observed in both analyzed interpretations of the Warsaw Music Workshop. In recording A, it is musical time, so length of segments and rests. In the recording B, it is the tempo of 2 and 3 motif notes, 2 and 3 note motifs, and their articulation, so lack of accents on the first note. What differs Narwalaby's rendition is the time distance, of course, and the lack of presence of a mentor, composer, and first performer of polychromy who would supervise the process. This interpretation is based entirely on the score, and indeed is characterized by particular care for the correct execution of the notation and respect for the performance instructions written in the notes, even more accurate than by the composer pianist himself in both recordings of the workshop. And finally, comparative analysis is a great tool that brings the researcher closer to getting to know both the work and the interpreter's performance style, and it leads to particularly interesting conclusions when we compare different recordings of the same performer or ensemble, especially in the case of compositions with a certain degree of indeterminacy, which, due to little amount of time that we have today, I have to save for another presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna, for this brilliant presentation. Indeed, this is a very interesting and fascinating topic to analyze contemporary music from the perspective of performance and different performance of the same work. So if there are any questions, we have still some time. I would ask you to probably come here closer, because from the distance, Anna will not hear us. So if there are any. then I might start with my question, because of course it's fascinating to hear about the progress you have made with your work and your reflections. However, I still have some question that that seems relevant, namely that of the recordings, because when you analyze, when you compare these different performances, different versions, your main tool to analyze is the recording, of course. And my question is how possibly the quality of recording in your analysis plays a role, because I feel that especially in the case of the older recordings that from vinyl records, well, they have some kind of noises, some kind of perhaps lesser quality. And how do you deal with that when you confront these older with the newer? Because we may have the impression that the newer recording probably has more colors. And maybe this is just a technical thing. What do you think?
Yes, it is, of course, a thing to be taken into consideration. The comparative analysis of the Warsaw Music Workshop and Narwalaby was made for the purpose of this conference, because in my PhD, I compare only different recordings by the same ensemble. So purely the Warsaw Music Workshop. I take a few different musical pieces that contain different degree of indeterminacy. So from pretty much fully determined works to graphic music by Bogusław Schafer, which is very interesting. So the problem of the quality of the sound is not as prominent as it was here in the presentation, because oldest recordings are, let's say, 1968, and the newest are 1977, I think. So the kind of change in sound is not as drastic. However, this is also something I take into consideration, as well as if the recording was made in a studio or if it's a live recording, because the differences are huge, not only in the sound quality of the production, but also in the very interpretation. As I mentioned in my paper, if you are in the studio, you have the time to precisely, repeatedly work on that interpretation. If you play live, there's only one chance and it's done. And also, I feel that the presence of the audience has an influence on the performers. That's obvious, right? But you can really sense it and you can really feel it and listen to it, you hear it from the recording, especially if you compare the parameters, like time parameter, that are written in the score with ones that are on the recording. So of course, this is something to notice and to take into consideration, but I don't maneuver, or I don't try to manually correct, for example, the quality of the recordings. I just don't do it, because I don't think that would be a great idea to, for example, try and delete the noises from an old recording, right? I just noise what I have and try to analyze what I have.
That exactly. So thank you for your response. Are there any more questions? We have time for perhaps one. No, I guess this is a very new subject to the audience, so they need to process the material that you presented. Very fascinating, very broad. So thank you for this, Anna. Congratulations, and please stay with us. I will now ask if we have Magdalena Białecka. I have to stop share, I guess.
Hello, I'm here.
Hello. Yes.
I'm very sorry for my clothes, but currently I'm on the survival camp on the desert island. So.
That's amazing, and you're on survival camp and in Barcelona. That's absolutely wonderful. Do you have any screen to share?
Yes, actually, I have a presentation. It's not very important, but I also have some recordings, and I would really like to show them. So I would be happy to be able to screen sharing.
Yes, so I believe you can do it now. If you have any problem, please let me know.
I hope it works.
Yes, it is appearing on our side, so. Yes, we have it. We have it.
Right.
So let me just introduce you briefly. Magdalena Białecka, an organist and pianist, and also a composer, as I have learned. Currently a master's student at the Faculty of Fine Arts of the University of Warmia and Mazur in northern Poland. And she will tackle the subject composer's problems, the work of music between the idea and the premiere performance in the light of philosophical thought and the composer-performer cooperation. So I will give the voice to you now.
Thank you very much. As a composer, I often ask myself questions about the ontological essence of composition, the philosophical weight of this question, notation of compositions, and communication with performance. In this context, the experiences related to the first performers of compositions are particularly important. Subsequent musicians who undertake the performance of the work already have the opportunity to continue a performance tradition. So it is the first performers who bear the greatest responsibility for materializing the composer's idea. In order to grasp the path of the musical and attempts to describe what it actually is. In my opinion, it is an ontologically homogeneous being that arises in the mind of a composer and remains there forever, shapeless shadows of it. So, for example, a score, the explanations about its first performance, subsequent performances, additions, performance tradition, criticism, audience perception, etc., are just the shadows of the idea, even if they are masterpieces themselves. It would be possible to locate the moment of the Latin compositio, connection. If the composer is the one who connects, does he or she have any real agency? Maybe a musical work does not actually take its being out of nowhere. Maybe music exists as an infinite ideal being. And the composer only chooses some of its elements. The composer mediates between its ideal existence and what's impossible within my conception, according to which it is something infinite, closed in the Kantian forms of time and... Yes?
Yes, we are experiencing some slow connection on your side. So maybe it would be recommended to switch off your video so that we just hear your voice and without seeing your face. Maybe that will be more visible.
Okay, I will also switch off the screen sharing. I hope it helps.
Yes, we can hear the birds now in the forest.
That's an island full of birds. It's amazing here. A lot of different, very rare species. So I consider it as a great inspiration for composer I
Yes, so
hope,
please, you can now continue because it seems it's made better.
Great. I told about this concept of the music as the ideal being and a composer who just connects another elements, and I told that it would be not possible within my conception because in this conception the work of music is closed in the Kantian forms of time and space. And if such finished works existed as ideal beings, it would mean the composer's lack of agency and free will, which after all cannot be denied to him or her because of his or her human nature. On the other hand, the assumption that a musical work is created later when performed seems to be flawed regardless of the concept adopted. The musical work would not then be a homogeneous being, but would be fragmented into many variants that metaphysically could not meet. The situation in which the composer performs the work himself or herself could be an ambiguous issue. However, even in such a performance, the composition will always lose much of its original concept. It will be only a reflection of it, one of the blurred, imperfect copies reflected in matter. After all, the composer, by playing, conducting, or singing a piece, reproduces his or her perfect concept with the means of expression that are available to him or her. The possibilities of the instrument, the technical skills of the composer, the acoustics of space, these are just a few of the factors disturbing the original perfection of the concept. Similarly with computer music. Even if a composer has planned every acoustic parameter of an electronic piece down to the smallest detail, his or her concept still has to be filtered through the limited capabilities of the computer system. Since I consider the moment of the crystallization of the concept in the mind of the composer as a determinant of the creation of a musical work, why do I perceive the premiere, the first performance, as a phenomenon worthy to attention? Well, in my opinion, the meaning of a musical work is not immanent. The composition does not exist for itself, but it is transcendent and transcendenting at the same time. Its signification goes beyond itself and consists in enabling the audience to transcend themselves. The composer's communication with the first performance seemed to be the most important link in a process that I would call transmission. By this term, I mean the path that the musical work must follow in order to appear in a transcendent context. The transmission begins at the moment when the composer decides to create a piece that will be intended for possible performance. The contemporary composer then usually decides to write the composition into some kind of score. The choice of notation is the first factor that can influence how faithful to an idea will be the work premiere. A different degree of perfection will be achieved by the materialization of a musical work written, for example, in the form of a traditional, aleatory, graphic score, etc. Another important factor in the transmission is the fact how much the composer will be involved in compiling the score and how carefully and detailed the composer will prepare its final version, regardless of whether the performance will receive it directly from the composer or in published form with the possible publisher's transformations. All explanations from the composer may also belong to the transmission in the form of correspondence, notes, conversations, interviews, etc. At this not always occurring stage, the composer's talks with the performers may take place. It may happen that the performers, as a result of this kind of contact with the composer, inspire him or her to transform the concept. For example, by changing the previously planned sonoristic use of instruments. The composer may also, depending on the ensemble planned for the premiere, change the work. For example, a work for symphonic orchestra can be transcribed into a large chamber ensemble, or a song for a contralto may be adapted to the possibilities of the soprano. Due to the high probability of significant changes in the composition following transmission, the transmission is a very important phenomenon for the ontological essence of a musical work. The premiere performance, as the most important element of the transmission, may also bring about changes in the concept, which, however, are not significant in the context of the path of a musical work, discussed here from the idea to the first performance of the work. It already broadcasts this update of the musical work that exists in its course. As we have tried to show, this materialization is imperfect. However, as in the handicap of Heidegger's broken tool, also in the weakness of the premiere performance, one can see a clearance in this case, musical existence. And now I would like to show one example. I really hope it will be possible on my computer with not very good connection. I would like to show the piece that I composed for the ensemble in Austria. It was Ensemble Fractal from Brussels. And I worked with these performers for 1 week, but we really had rehearsals every day for hours. They asked many questions. The communication was extremely good. And then I would like to compare this performance to one of the subsequent performances when I never talked to the performers. I never saw them. They just performed the piece themselves, and they already had some let's call it performance tradition. And I would like to maybe I won't tell more. I will just show to you the composition, just a few minutes, and later we will compare the results. There's no time to listen to the entire composition. I just want to compare this fragment with another performance.
So I'm afraid we are lost with the connection, at least with the sound. Hope it is not for good. Magdalena, are you still there?
Yes.
Yes, so we have been experiencing some technical issues with the sound. The first recording went quite smoothly, but this one was interrupted. So maybe could you come back to your speech?
Yes. So I just wanted to show this example of the realizations of the same concept on the same how important this this state of transmission is, the the communication with performers. You didn't see the score. Maybe it would be good to analyze the score, but first performance that was relation of the composer with the performance quite close to the original concept, but still it experienced some limitations that didn't my idea in its
Yes, I guess we don't hear you anymore.
fullness. As, for example, the sonoristic levels, each instrument is different, and the sample we had the rehearsals on another. I really hope I will try to do anything to make the connection better. So I'm really sorry for the bad connection, and maybe in this situation it's time to end.
Well, yes, thank you. I'm sorry also that you were not able to show us everything you wanted because of this this difficulty with techniques. However, I will ask if there are any questions. Perhaps we can send it on chat to you, because I believe that maybe the connection will not allow to conduct a real discussion. So it is my duty now to ask if there are any questions from the listeners. Yeah, indeed. So I guess we unfortunately we didn't receive all you wanted to share with us. So so I'm afraid this is going to end without discussion, because we are not able to relate fully to what you said. But well, I got your point in the way you presented different recordings as examples of the same work. And perhaps if you can hear me still, I will ask you, what do you think is the core of the work that remains unchanged, independent of a performance, right? So what do you think that constitutes the work and that doesn't change in different performances? What do you think?
Because may also change, may be at some points changed for some additions, etc. for the different purposes, but of course it doesn't happen often. And the score is very close to the concept, and is something that is much more it's not as the concept that is metaphysical, so we don't have the full access to the concept.
Yes, I get your point. So are there any questions? I guess we really have difficulty with communicating. So so I guess we may close this session. So thank you very much. Perhaps if you want to ask Magdalena any question, you could write an email. Magdalena, perhaps you can give us your email on chat in case there were any reflections on your speech. Yes, so we thank you very much for that. Thank you for connecting. We are sorry about this technical situation, but every time there is an online session, we have to count with some problems. Yes, so thank you very much, and thank you very much for coming. And I guess, yes, we have no more papers in this session, so you can be free to join another session right now. Thank you very much. Listeners, oh, we have Anna. She raised a hand.
No, I didn't raise my hand. It was the emoji of clapping hands.
Ah, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, and give you support.
Thank you very much. So
I also wanted to add, if there are any questions maybe later to me, I can also give you my email address on the chat, since there were no questions.
Yes, that's a
right
good
now.
idea.
Okay.
Okay. So thank you very much.
I think we should applaud you.